Hello, everybody. Welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why, and how of newspaper reading. Today, we shall be analyzing the Hindu newspaper dated 29th of March 2019 of the New Delhi edition. The topics to be discussed today has been presented on your screen. Timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. Now, the first article appears on page number 14. The title of the article is New Loan Pricing Scheme May Be Put Off. Now, you all must be aware that the Reserve Bank of India is required to control the rate of inflation, wherein the RBI has been mandated to maintain the rate of inflation at 4%, wherein the rate of inflation could either increase or decrease by plus or minus 2%. That is to say that the rate of inflation in India has to be always maintained between 2 to 6%. And the rate of inflation in our economy is in turn dependent upon the total amount of money supply in the circulation. That is to say, if the total amount of money supply in our economy increases, it leads to inflation. Similarly, if the total amount of money supply reduces, it leads to a recession. Hence, in order to control inflation and to promote economic growth, the RBI is required to control the total amount of money supply in our economy. So, this particular ability of the RBI to control the total amount of money supply in our economy can be referred to as the monetary policy transmission. Now, for example, when the rate of inflation in our economy is higher, the RBI would increase the policy rates. Now, for example, during a higher rate of inflation, the RBI may increase the benchmark rate, that is the repo rate. So, as the repo rate increases, the banks will be borrowing money from the RBI at a higher rate of interest. Because of this, the rate at which the banks will be giving loans also increases. So, as the amount of loans in our economy reduces, accordingly, the money supply in our economy also reduces. Similarly, during the recession, the RBI would reduce the policy rates such as the repo rate. So, when the repo rate is reduced, it essentially means that the banks would be allowed to borrow money from the RBI at a lower rate of interest. Accordingly, the rate of interest at which the banks would be giving loans would reduce, and because of which the money supply in the economy would increase. So you can clearly see here, as the policy rates of the RBI have got changed, accordingly the money supply in the economy also gets changed accordingly. This essentially refers to the monetary policy transmission. Now, for example, if RBI has increased the repo rate by 0.25%, accordingly, the bank should also increase the rate of interest on the loans by 0.25%, and this would lead to a decrease in the money supply in our economy. Now, with respect to monetary policy transmission, the transmission may either be efficient or inefficient monetary policy transmission. Now, for the example which I have given here, the RBI has increased the repo rate by 0.25%, and accordingly the banks have also increased the rate of interest on the loans by 0.25%. Now, this can be referred to as an efficient monetary policy transmission. On the other hand, let's say if RBI has increased the repo rate by 0.25%, however, the banks have reduced the interest rate on the loans by only 0.10%. Now, this is an inefficient monetary policy transmission. Now, because of the inefficient monetary policy transmission, the RBI would find it difficult to control the total amount of money supply in the economy. So, essentially, an efficient monetary policy transmission takes place when the banks increase or decrease the rate of interest on their loans according to the changes in the policy rates. And more importantly, such an increase or decrease in the rate of interest on the loans should be commensurate with the increase or decrease in the policy rates of the RBI. Now, it is being said that the monetary policy transmission in India is quite inefficient. So, in order to improve the monetary policy transmission, the RBI had introduced the marginal cost of lending rate in the year 2016. However, in spite of introduction of MCLR in order to improve the monetary policy transmission, this did not have the intended effect on the economy, which means to say even the MCLR concept had certain inefficiencies with respect to the monetary policy transmission. Hence, in order to address this particular problem, in the month of December 2018, the Monetary Policy Committee recommended that all the banks have to shift to the external benchmarking of the loans, which means to say the rate of interest at which the banks are giving loans should be linked to certain external benchmarks and not to the internal benchmarks which was earlier followed under the MCLR concept. Now, with respect to the transition to external benchmarking of loans, the RBI was required to come out with the detailed guidelines related to external benchmarking of the loans by the end of December 2018. However, so far the RBI has not come out with the detailed guidelines for the external benchmarking of loans. It is because of this article here has highlighted that the adoption of the external benchmarking of loans may be put off because of this particular delay on behalf of the RBI. Hence, as part of this video analysis, we'll first understand as to what exactly is the marginal cost of lending rate and certain problems associated with the MCLR which has led to an inefficient monetary policy transmission. Secondly, we'll understand the concept of the external benchmarking of loans and how this is said to improve the monetary policy transmission in India. Apart from that, some of the banks in India have also raised certain concerns with respect to the external benchmarking of loans, wherein they have argued that the adoption of external benchmarking of loans may not actually lead to an improvement in the monetary policy transmission efficiency. So, in the third aspect of the article, we'll understand certain problems with respect to the external benchmarking of the loans. Further, based upon our video analysis, an expected UPSC mains question would be examine the reasons for replacing the MCLR with the external benchmarking of loans by the RBI. Do you think the external benchmarking of loans will improve the efficiency of the monetary policy transmission in India? Give arguments in your support. Let us now start analyzing these aspects of the article one by one. Let us first understand the concept of the marginal cost of lending rate. Now, MCLR refers to the minimum rate of interest on the loans offered by the banks. That is to say, it is a rate of interest below which the banks cannot give loans to any of its customers. It is to be noted that the MCLR is calculated by individual banks and it is not fixed by the RBI, wherein different banks have different MCLR rates. So, since the MCLR is fixed by the individual banks, it is referred to as an internal benchmark. Now, let us say the State Bank of India has fixed the MCLR at 8%. It would mean that the State Bank of India would not be allowed to give loans below the 8%. Similarly, the ICICI Bank may have a different MCLR rate of around 9%. Now, the difference here lies in the fact that both these rates are internally fixed by the individual banks. Now, for example, let's say the State Bank of India is giving loans. So, in order to determine the rate of interest on the loans, the SBI adds its own profit margin to the MCLR. So, the addition of MCLR and the profit margin then becomes the rate of interest on the loans offered by the State Bank of India. Now, what is important to be noted here is that the profit margin of the State Bank of India would be dependent upon the credit worthiness of the borrower as well as the purposes for which the loan is given for. And in banking terms, this profit margin, which is fixed by the individual bank, is also referred to as the spread. So, since the spread depends upon the credit worthiness as well as the type of loans, the rate of interest on the loans offered by the banks for different purposes would also vary. Now, as you can see here, both MCLR as well as profit margin is internally fixed by the individual bank. That is why the MCLR was referred to as an internal benchmark. And this particular internal benchmark was then used by the banks to fix the interest rate on different categories of loans. Now, before MCLR, the RBI had mandated to fix the minimum rate of interest on the loans based upon a concept known as the base rate regime. And MCLR has replaced the base rate regime in the year April 2016. Now, the reason for replacing the base rate with the MCLR was to improve the efficiency of the monetary policy transmission. In this regard, let us understand as to what is the exact difference between the base rate regime and the MCLR. Now, with respect to difference, two things are common to base rate and MCLR. These are the cash reserve ratio cost as well as the operating cost. Now, with respect to cash reserve ratio, you must be aware that all the banks in India are required to keep a certain percentage of the depositors' money with the Reserve Bank of India. And this particular percentage is referred to as the cash reserve ratio, wherein the present CRR rate is 4%. Now, the cash reserve ratio is considered as a cost for the bank because the RBI does not pay any interest on the CRR deposits of the bank. However, the bank would be required to pay the interest to the depositors on their money which they have deposited with the bank. So, since the RBI does not pay any interest on the CRR deposits, it is considered to be a kind of cost for the bank which has to be accounted for calculating the rate of interest on the loans. So both base rate as well as the MCLR takes into account the cost of CRR. Similarly, base rate and MCLR also take into account the operating cost of the bank, that is to say, the operational expenses incurred by the banks in order to maintain their day-to-day activities. However, one main difference between the base rate and MCLR is that under the base rate, we used to take into account the cost of funds. Whereas under MCLR, we are taking into account the marginal cost of funds. So in order to understand the difference between the cost of funds and the marginal cost of funds, let us look at this particular diagram. Now you all must be aware, the banks are actually referred to as the financial intermediaries. This is because the banks accept the depositors' money and the same money is then given in the form of loans. So what essentially the banks are doing here is that they are facilitating the exchange of money from the depositors to the borrowers. So in an ideal scenario, the rate of interest on the loans given by the banks should ideally be linked to the rate of interest on the deposits. That is to say, if the rate of interest on the deposits increase, similarly, the rate of interest on the loans should also increase. In similar terms, if there is decrease in the rate of interest on the deposits, the rate of interest on the loans should also reduce. So in order to calculate the base rate by the banks, we used to take into account the cost of funds, that is to say, the rate of interest on the deposits offered by the banks. So based upon the rate of interest offered by the banks on its deposits, the rate of interest on the loans used to be determined under the base rate regime. We have seen earlier with respect to the efficient monetary policy transmission that whenever the RBI changes the policy rates such as the repo rate, then such changes should have to get reflected in the rate of interest on the loans. However, if you look at the way the base rate was calculated, the repo rate was not taken into consideration for the calculation of rate of interest on the loans offered by the banks. And this was in turn leading to an inefficient monetary policy transmission. So in order to address this particular problem, the RBI introduced the concept of MCLR in April 2016. Wherein, in order to calculate the rate of interest on the loans, the banks would also be required to take into consideration the changes in the repo rate. So this is the first basic difference between the base rate and MCLR, wherein the base rate does not take into account the changes in the repo rate, whereas MCLR takes into account the changes in the repo rate, and this is basically done in order to improve the monetary policy transmission. The other difference between the base rate and MCLR lies in the fact as to how the rate of interest on the deposits is calculated. Now, under the base rate, we used to take into account the rate of interest on all the deposits. That is to say, whether the deposits are new or old. However, under the MCLR, we are taking into account the rate of interest which is offered only on the new deposits. Now here the word marginal is used because whenever the banks increase or decrease the rate of interest on the new deposits, then accordingly there would be either a marginal increase or decrease in the cost of funds for the banks. So ideally, when the banks either increase or decrease the rate of interest on new deposits, accordingly the rate of interest on the loans should also vary accordingly. So the main idea behind the introduction of MCLR was to improve the monetary policy transmission and to address the problems associated with the base rate regime. However, as we have discussed, in spite of introduction of MCLR, the monetary policy transmission in India has remained inefficient. It is in this particular regard, let us now understand certain problems with respect to the MCLR regime, which has led to the introduction of the external benchmarking of interest rates. Now, as we have discussed, for an efficient monetary policy transmission, whenever the RBI changes the policy rates in India, accordingly, the rate of interest on loans should get changed. That is, as the policy rates reduce, the rate of interest on the loans should also reduce. On the other hand, when the policy rates increase, the rate of interest on the loans should also increase. However, what was observed under the MCLR regime was that whenever the RBI increased the policy rates, the banks were quick in transmitting these policy rates to the consumers by increasing the rate of interest on the loans. This is because by increasing the rate of interest on the loans, the banks were able to get more amount of profits. On the other hand, whenever the RBI reduced the policy rates, such as the repo rate, the banks did not transmit the cut in the policy rates in the form of the reduction in rate of interest on the loans. And usually, the banks used to take undue amount of time in transmitting this cut in the policy rates. So, what this essentially means here is that as the policy rates are reduced, the banks were able to borrow money from the RBI at a lower rate of interest. However, they are not passing this particular benefit onto the consumers by reducing the rate of interest on the loans. So, because of this particular problem, there used to be an undue delay with respect to the monetary policy transmission, leading to its inefficiency. The second problem with respect to MCLR regime was lack of transparency in fixing the MCLR rate. This is because the MCLR is calculated by taking into account the internal parameters such as the rate of interest offered on new deposits, the operating cost, the CRR cost, etc. Because of this, there was lack of transparency whenever a bank fixed the MCLR. So, because of this lack of transparency in the MCLR rates across the Indian banks used to be higher even when the policy rates were reduced by the RBI. And this was also leading to an inefficiency in the monetary policy transmission. Hence, in order to address these problems associated with the MCLR regime, the RBI has now decided to introduce the concept of the external benchmarking of the interest rates. In this regard, let us understand as to what exactly is the external benchmarking of interest rate, how it works, and the problems associated with the external benchmarking. Now, external benchmarking of interest rate essentially means that the rate of interest on the loans would be linked to the external parameters rather than the internal parameters as done under the MCLR regime. Now, under the external benchmarking of interest rate, the RBI has given four options to the bank in order to fix the rate of interest on their loans. Now, these options which are given to the bank include the repo rate, the rate of interest on treasury bills such as the T91 and T182. Apart from that, the bank can also use the interest rate which is fixed by an agency known as the Financial Benchmarks India Private Limited. Now, banks can use any of these four options in order to link their interest rates on the loans. So, it is expected that if the banks link their interest rates on the loans to external benchmarks, we would be able to avoid the problems which are presently associated with the MCLR regime. However, there are certain problems associated with the external benchmarking of the interest rates. Now, this particular problem can be understood by looking at this particular diagram. Now, in order to give loans to its customers, the bank is dependent upon both RBI as well as the depositors' money. That is to say, the bank gets the money from both RBI and the depositors, and the same money is then given in the form of loans. Now, what we have done as part of the external benchmarking is that we have taken into account the rate of interest at which the banks are getting the money from the RBI, and we are not taking into account the rate of interest offered by the bank on the depositors' money. So, the problem which arises here is that presently the banks are more dependent upon the depositors' money and less dependent upon the money from the RBI in order to give away the loans. It is because of this particular reason some of the banks in India are opposing the external benchmarking of interest rates. Let us understand as to why the banks are opposed to the external benchmarking. Now, just imagine a scenario where the RBI has decided to reduce the policy rates. That is, let's say the repo rate has been reduced. However, the rate of interest on the deposits has continued to increase. Now, because of this external benchmarking, the bank would be required to reduce the rate of interest on the loans. However, the bank is getting a major part of the money from the depositors at a higher rate of interest, and this can lead to a significant loss for the banks. So, under external benchmarking, a situation can arise wherein the banks may be offering a higher rate of interest to the depositors. On the other hand, they are giving loans at a lesser rate of interest, and this can lead to a loss for the banks. The second main problem with respect to the external benchmarking here is that there is a difference between the credit growth and the deposit growth of the banks in India. That is to say, there is a difference between the rate at which the bank has given loans and the rate at which the banks have accepted the deposits, wherein the credit growth in India is much higher than the deposit growth. Now, what this essentially means here is that the banks have given more amount of loans to its customers, and in order to get this additional money to be given in the form of loans, the banks have increased the rate of interest on the deposits. So as the rate of interest on the deposits has increased, more number of depositors have deposited their money with the bank, and this particular money has been given in the form of loans to its customers. In other words, the rate of interest on the loans in India is higher because the banks are offering a higher rate of interest on their deposits. So in future, under the concept of external benchmarking, if the RBI decides to reduce the policy rate such as the repo rate, under such circumstances, the bank would not be in a position to reduce the rate of interest on the loans. This is because the rate of interest on the deposits is much higher. So in accordance with the external benchmarking, in this particular example, if a particular bank decides to reduce the rate of interest on its loans, this can lead to the loss for the banks. This is because the bank is giving a higher rate of interest to the depositors, but it is giving loans at a lesser rate of interest. Now, the third problem with respect to external benchmarking is with respect to volatility in the interest rates. Now, under the external benchmarking, the rate of interest on the loans would be linked to certain external parameters such as the repo rate, the rate of interest on T91, T182, etc. Now, these rates change frequently. Now, because of this, some of the banks have argued that the rate of interest on the loans could also change frequently, leading to a volatility. Now, with respect to your upcoming prelims, some of the important points which you should note with respect to this video analysis is the repo rate is used for the calculation of MCLR. Secondly, the problems with the MCLR regime, why RBI is trying to introduce the concept of the external benchmarking of interest rates, and the parameters which would be used for the external benchmarking of the interest rate on the loans. Now, these are some of the important aspects which you should know with respect to this particular article. Further, based upon our video analysis, you can try writing answer to this expected UPSC mains question. With this, let us now take up the next article. The next article appears on page number 9. The title of the article is The Shape of an Urban Employment Guarantee. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 3, Economy, under the subsection Inclusive Growth and Issues Arising from it. Now, this particular article is based upon a recent report which was in news known as the Periodic Labour Force Survey Report published by the National Sample Survey Organization. Now, this particular report had highlighted that the unemployment rate in India has increased to around 6.1%, which is highest in the last 45 years. Further, this report had also highlighted that the major part of unemployment in India is basically concentrated in the urban areas rather than in the rural areas. Now, this particular problem of unemployment in urban areas can significantly affect the future economic growth of India. Apart from that, the higher level of unemployment would also lead to the problem of inclusive growth. Hence, in order to address this particular problem of unemployment in the urban areas, this particular article here has suggested for introduction of a universal employment program on the lines of MG Narega even for the urban areas as well. Hence, as part of this video analysis, let us understand the important highlights of this particular article with respect to the improvement of the employment scenario in the urban areas. Let us understand the recommendations given by the authors in order to improve the urban employment situation in India. Now, the authors of this particular article have highlighted that even though the government of India is focusing on development of urban areas, the government has so far focused only on the development of the large metropolitan cities. That is to say, the government has not focused on the development of the small towns and cities. Now, this is evident in the fact that if you look at the two major flagship programs of the government, that is Amrut, that is Atal Mission for Rejuvenation of Urban Transformation, as well as the Smart Cities Mission, both of these programs predominantly focus on the larger cities and towns and they neglect the smaller towns and cities. So, because of lack of emphasis of the government on the development of smaller towns and cities, the urban employment situation in India has actually worsened. So, in order to improve the urban employment situation, we need to focus on the development of the small towns and cities. Further, the authors of this particular article have also argued that the government must design a wage employment program for the urban areas on the lines of the MG Narega, which is applicable only for the rural areas. Now, such a wage employment program in the urban areas must provide for a guaranteed work of minimum 100 days in a year, wherein the workers would have to be paid minimum 500 rupees per day. It is expected that designing such a universal wage employment program for the urban areas would alleviate the urban employment problem in India. Apart from that, the authors have also highlighted the benefits of such a program. Now, such a universal program would ensure that the people in the urban areas would have a legal right to work, and this would strengthen the right to life guaranteed under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. Further, you must be aware that under MG Narega, we are mainly providing for employment to the unskilled workers. However, with respect to the urban areas, such a wage employment program would be able to cater to various kinds of people who have different levels of skills as well as education. That is to say, the people would be able to get employment in the urban areas irrespective of their skill levels as well as the level of education. Now, with respect to providing employment to various kinds of people with varying levels of skill and education, the authors have highlighted that the government should focus on creation of two types of jobs. The first one is the green jobs and the second one is care deficit jobs. Now, with respect to green jobs, it essentially means that the government would have to create the employment opportunities for the creation, maintenance and rejuvenation of the urban commons such as the lakes, parks as well as the wastelands. So, with respect to creation of green jobs, one can see that there are mainly two benefits. Firstly, we will be able to provide employment opportunities to the urban poor, and secondly, we will be able to improve the urban ecology, leading to improvement in the standard of living of the people. With respect to the care deficit jobs, it essentially means creating the employment opportunities that would take care of the children, elderly as well as the disabled in the urban areas. So the main benefit of such a program is that on one hand, we would be able to improve the urban employment situation in India, and on the other hand, we would be able to improve the urban ecology and also provide for the care of children, elderly as well as disabled. Further, you must have observed that the level of unemployment, particularly among the educated youths in India, has increased. Hence, in order to improve the employability of the educated youths, that is to say, to improve their chances of getting employment, the government should focus on providing necessary skills to such unemployed youths. Apart from that, the government should also focus on designing apprenticeship programs for the educated unemployed youths. That is to say, through the apprenticeship programs, the educated unemployed youths should get associated with the organizations in order to improve their level of skills. In this regard, the authors have highlighted that the educated youths with a higher level of education in the urban areas should be allowed to work as apprentice in the government departments as well as the municipal bodies. As part of this particular program, the authors have highlighted that the educated youths should be given regular stipend for a certain duration of time. The design of such a program would lead to an improvement in the skill levels of the educated youths in the urban areas. Now, with respect to funding and benefits of the Universal Wage Employment Program, the authors have estimated the cost of this particular program to be around 1.7 to 2.7 percentage of India's GDP. Further, they have also highlighted that such a universal wage employment program would be able to provide employment to around 30 to 50 million people living in the urban areas. Finally, it can be concluded that designing of a universal wage employment program on the lines of MG Narega for the urban areas would have a local multiplier effect, wherein such a program would be able to create employment opportunities, improve the standard of living, and such a wage employment program would lead to regular employment of the people, leading to an increase in per capita income, and this consequently would boost the urban demand in the economy. Further, creation of green jobs in the urban areas would lead to improvement in the urban environment. Such a program would also be able to address the care deficit by creating jobs that would cater to children, elderly, as well as disabled. And lastly, such a program would lead to improvement in the skill levels of the educated, unemployed youths in the urban areas. So these are some of the important recommendations given in this article with respect to improving the urban employment scenario in India. Further, based upon our discussion, an expected UPSC mains question here could be a universal wage employment program on the lines of MG Narega for the urban areas would not only address the problem of unemployment but would also have a local multiplier effect substantiate. With this, now let us take up the next article. Now, the next article appears on page number 7. The title of the article is Government Defends the Move on Finance Act. This article shall be important mainly from the perspective of prelims under the subsection Indian polity. Now, before analyzing this particular article, let us first look into its background. You all must be aware whenever the finance minister presents the union budget, such a union budget is usually accompanied by two bills. These are the finance bill and the appropriation bill. The finance bill essentially deals with the income side of the budget. That is to say, the proposals related to taxation are part of the financial bill. However, the appropriation bill deals with the expenditure side of the budget. That is to say, through the passage of appropriation bill, the government seeks the approval of the parliament to withdraw the money from the consolidated fund of India. Further, you need to note that the finance bill, which is introduced as part of union budget, is always a money bill. This is because it is dealing with the matters related to the taxation. But the question which can be raised here is that whether the finance bill can contain other matters which may not be related to the taxation. That is to say, can the government include other matters which may not be related to taxation in the financial bill and pass this particular bill as money bill? Now, this particular issue had cropped up with respect to the financial bill which was introduced along with the Union Budget 2017. Now, this particular financial bill of the year 2017 contained the proposals related to taxation as well as the other matters which are not related to taxation. Now, for example, the Financial Bill 2017 had introduced certain amendments related to certain tribunals in India. For example, the Financial Bill 2017 had decided to merge the Competition Appellate Tribunal with the National Company Law Appellate Tribunal. Apart from that, certain amendments were also made with respect to the National Green Tribunal. So the question which can be raised here is that whether such matters can be included in the financial bill along with the taxation proposals. This is extremely important looking at the federal structure of the country. This is because the Rajya Sabha has limited powers with respect to the money bill. For example, the Rajya Sabha cannot amend the money bill nor can it reject the money bill. Further, the Rajya Sabha is required to return the money bill within 14 days to the Lok Sabha. However, the Rajya Sabha can only suggest certain amendments to the money bill. So with respect to the money bill, the Rajya Sabha can neither reject nor amend the money bill, and it can only give certain recommendations to the Lok Sabha. And more importantly, the money bill has to be written by the Rajya Sabha within 14 days. So since the Finance Bill 2017 included other matters which are not completely related to the matters of the taxation, the opposition parties have filed for a PIL before the Supreme Court, arguing that the Financial Bill 2017 has deliberately included other matters in order to undermine the powers of the Rajya Sabha in India, wherein the opposition parties have been arguing that the money bill should only deal with the matters of taxation and it should not include other matters. This is because if we include other matters in the finance bill, that is a money bill, this can undermine the powers of the Rajya Sabha in India. Further, the opposition party has also argued that various tribunals such as the Competition Appellate Tribunal, the National Company Law Appellate Tribunal have been set up through an act of parliament. That is to say, it has been set up based upon the approval of both Lok Sabha as well as the Rajya Sabha. Hence, by including such appellate tribunals in the Financial Bill 2017, the Rajya Sabha's approval is not taken for the merger of such tribunals. However, with respect to this stand of the opposition party, the government has stated that the finance bill is always a money bill, and because of this, the government can include even other matters in the finance bill. And more importantly, the government has also argued that the Speaker of Lok Sabha, who is the final authority to certify the money bill, has certified the Financial Bill 2017 as a money bill. Hence, in this regard, the government has argued that one should not question this particular decision of the Speaker to declare the Financial Bill 2017 as the money bill. And as the article here has highlighted, the opposition parties have filed for a PIL before the Supreme Court. The government has taken a stand that the power of the Speaker to certify the money bill is final and this should not be questioned by the opposition party. So, with respect to this particular controversy, the Supreme Court is still hearing this particular case. So, this essentially becomes a news in transition. So, let us wait and watch as to what would be the decision of the Supreme Court with respect to this particular controversy. Now, with respect to your upcoming prelims, you would be required to understand various details related to the money bill. That is to say, what exactly is the definition of money bill under the Indian Constitution and the powers of Rajya Sabha with respect to money bill. So these are some of the important aspects which one must know with respect to this particular article. With this, let us now take up the next article. Now the next article appears on page number 5. The title of the article is 4 Ecotourism Centers Closed in Wayanad. Now this article shall be important from the perspective of prelims under the subsection General Issues on Environmental Ecology. Earlier, the central government had come out with a comprehensive framework for the management of the ecotourism areas. In accordance with the framework adopted by the central government, all the state governments in India were required to come out with a detailed strategy for the management of the ecotourism areas. However, this particular article has highlighted that the government of Kerala has failed to come out with the detailed strategy for the management of the ecotourism areas. It is in this particular regard the Kerala High Court has banned the entry of tourists into 4 ecotourism centers. So with respect to your upcoming prelims, let us understand the names of these ecotourism centers as well as their location. Now the locations which have been closed by the Kerala High Court include the Suchipara waterfalls, which is located in the Mepadi forest range, the Kuruva Island, which is located on the Kabini river in the Wayanad district, the Chembra Peak, which is located in the Mepadi forest range, and the Meenmuthi waterfalls, which is located in the Kalpeta forest range. Further, you need to note that the Wayanad Wildlife Sanctuary is located in the Wayanad district of Kerala, wherein to the northeast of this particular sanctuary, 2 national parks are located. These national parks are the Nagarhole National Park and the Bandipur National Park, located in the state of Karnataka. And towards the southeast of the Wayanad Wildlife Sanctuary, the Madhubalai National Park, located in the state of Tamil Nadu, is found. Further, the Wayanad Wildlife Sanctuary is an integral part of the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. So these are some of the important aspects which one must know with respect to this particular article. With this, let us now take up the next article. Now the next article appears on page number 18. The title of the article is Israel Unveils the World's Longest Salt Cave. This article shall be important mainly from the perspective of prelims under the subsection Current Events of International Importance. As the title of this particular article suggests, Israel has recently unveiled the world's longest salt cave. Hence, as part of this video analysis, let us understand certain basic details related to this particular salt cave. The name of this underground salt cave is Malham and it is around 10 kilometers long. This particular underground salt cave is located in Mount Sodom, which is Israel's largest mountain. Now, with respect to the location of Mount Sodom, it is located along the Dead Sea as highlighted in the map. Further, you need to note that the Dead Sea borders Israel and Jordan. Now, before the discovery of the Malham underground salt cave, it was believed that the Namakdan cave, located in Iran, is the world's longest salt cave. However, the discovery of Malham has proved that the Malham cave is much more extensive than Iran's Namakdam cave. Now, these are some of the important aspects which one must know with respect to this particular article. Now, the next article appears as an editorial on page number 8. The title of the article is Power in Space. Now, this particular article is specifically talking about the mission Shakti, which basically corresponds to the successful testing of the anti-satellite missile by India. Now, the various aspects of this particular article has been comprehensively been covered in our DNS dated 28th of March 2019 by Mangal sir. So, I request you to go to this particular DNS in order to comprehensively understand various aspects related to the mission Shakti. Now, based upon our video analysis, these 4 questions shall be a prelims question for the practice. Please pause this video and try to find answers to these 4 questions. We will be discussing the answers after 5 seconds. The first question here is, consider the following statements related to the external benchmarking of interest rates. The first statement here is, it is proposed to be introduced in order to improve the monetary policy transmission. As we have discussed, this particular statement here is correct. The second statement reads as, under this, the banks would be required to link the interest rates on the loans to the repo rate as well as the interest rates on the deposits. Now, this particular statement here is wrong. This is because under the external benchmarking, the banks would be required to link the interest rate to certain external benchmark such as the repo rate, and they cannot link the interest rate to the rate of interest on the deposits. The third statement reads as, the adoption of external benchmarking may lead to volatility in the interest rates. As we have discussed, this particular statement here is correct. So, if you look at the options which are given here, the correct answer to this particular question is C, that is 193 only. Now, coming to the second question here, the question here is, consider the following statements related to the money bill. The first statement here is, the money bill can be introduced only in Lok Sabha. Now, this statement here is correct. The second statement reads as, the Rajya Sabha can suggest amendments in the money bill. Now, this statement here is also correct. It is to be noted here that the Rajya Sabha cannot amend or reject the money bill, but it can only suggest the amendments to the money bill, and these amendments can either be accepted or rejected by the Lok Sabha. So, if you look at the options which are given here, the correct answer to this particular question is C, that is both 1 and 2. Now, coming to the third question here, the question here is, which among the following correctly depicts the concept of the efficient monetary policy transmission? The first statement reads as, the changes in the policy rates by the RBI should get reflected in the changes in the rate of interest on the loans offered by the banks. As we have discussed, this statement here is correct. The second statement reads as, the rate of interest on the loans should be linked only to the rate of interest on the deposits by the banks. Now, this statement here, as we have discussed, is wrong. So, if you look at the options which are given here, the correct answer to this particular question is A, that is 1 only. Now, coming to the fourth question, the question here is, which among the following countries are located along the borders of the Dead Sea? As we have discussed, along the borders of Dead Sea, both Israel as well as Jordan are located. So, accordingly, the answer to this particular question is A, that is 192 only. With this, we have come to end of today's discussion. Now, let us look at the question for the day.